Hello and welcome to the MSCTY School of Sound Art. I am your host Robin the Fog, and this is part 4 in a series of short videos exploring the relationship between sound and space, architecture and environment. And it's a slightly more constricted relationship than usual in today's episode, because I've unfortunately succumbed to a popular virus that you might have heard of, which has resulted in my being confined to my flat for almost a fortnight. As you can imagine, this has rather precluded me from heading off on one of my usual sound hunting adventures. But as luck would have it, I got off rather lightly in terms of actually feeling ill, and so with a sudden abundance of time on my hands and a desire to ward off the onset of cabin fever, I decided to try and find some creative inspiration in my immediate surroundings. In all honesty, having a tidy up would probably have been a more productive use of my time, but where's the fun in that? So, where to begin? Thanks to an entirely inattentive and indifferent landlord, Fog Towers is in far from tip-top condition these days, yet even with so many bits falling off it, the place just doesn't contain a particular wealth of interesting noises. One thing it does contain is my flatmate Vanessa and her oboe, and she has very kindly agreed to help out with today's experiment in whatever form it might take. When inspiration finally did arrive, it came from a rather unexpected source. One night while having tea, I found myself watching an episode of a particularly classic documentary series that some obliging soul just happened to have uploaded to YouTube. About halfway through the episode, during what appeared to be a musical interlude featuring some kind of chanting, there came a sudden moment where the soundtrack unexpectedly dropped away and became intermittent and fuzzy. I suppose it is entirely possible that the aforementioned uploader had not sought the proper permissions from the copyright holders before charging ahead, and that this was their attempt to avoid censure from the ever-watchful YouTube overlords. Either way, the medieval music community's loss was very much my gain, as the partial erasure of the recording had left audio smudges behind that merged together to form the faintest outline of the original recording, a kind of Gregorian ghost, if you will. Isn't that fantastic? I've done practically nothing to this recording at all, merely extracted it from the video, turned the volume up and added the tiniest smidgen of reverb just to even out the sounds a little. Otherwise, it's exactly as it appeared on YouTube, an instant piece of accidental sound art. All of which got me thinking about the concept of the ready-made. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this kind of thing, those happy accidents where recordings literally seem to create themselves without much need for arrangement, editing, or post-production trickery. Countless examples exist, far more than we could ever hope to cover here. So instead of opening up the floodgates in this video, I've simply chosen some of my own favourites from recent years, but do feel free to get in touch with a few of your own. One of the first examples I ever encountered, and still one of my all-time favourites, is that of the Conant Project, a collection of recordings documenting so-called numbers stations that was compiled by Erdile Discs in the 1990s. This took the form of a 4-CD box set of these mysterious shortwave broadcasts captured from all over the world. Tracks such as the opening Swedish Rhapsody have an otherworldliness that makes them sound like they should be lurking somewhere on an album by Boards of Canada rather than haunting the airwaves over Europe. To this day, it remains one of the spookiest collections of sound that you're ever likely to hear. Closer to home, a more recent example comes from my time working on the Unlocking Our Sound Heritage project with the team at London Metropolitan Archives. In early 2019, we'd been set the task of preserving and digitising the audio archives of the Whitechapel Bell Foundry, and came across a spool of tape in the collection labelled simply Kent 16. Originally an extended performance of handbells that stretched across both sides of a single-track mono reel-to-reel tape, we discovered entirely by accident that playing the tape on a more modern 2-track machine enables one to hear both sides of the recording simultaneously, one side playing forward and the other in reverse, in a way that the original performers could never have imagined. It was one of those rare moments of wonderful serendipity, and not a million miles away from something Terry Riley or Brian Eno might have come up with. And finally, perhaps my favourite example of all time, the London Sound Survey recordings of Tower Bridge. Created by London Sound Survey founder Ian Rawes while deep inside the Bascule chambers far below the famous London landmark, and below the waterline too, this is an unedited field recording of the historic suspension bridge mechanism in operation. To me, this one just defies description. The sounds of the vintage machinery, the elevation of the bridge itself, and the corresponding movement of the enormous counterweights into the chamber feels like nothing less than a work of deliberate orchestration, and something that none of us at ground level would ever have heard or imagined were it not for one inquisitive individual with the right pair of ears that just happened to come along. Speaking of deliberate orchestration, in 2015 the composer Ian Chambers created a remarkable new arrangement by combining the original bridge recording with a small group of musicians and performing inside the Bascule chamber itself. One of the strangest concerts I've ever witnessed, but utterly sublime as you can imagine. Plenty to fuel inspiration there. So I started digging around my surroundings in search of a few happy accidents of my own. As mentioned earlier, these surroundings unfortunately don't contain any functioning reel-to-reel machines, as they're all several miles away at my studio. But gazing upon this small pile of broken tape machines that for some reason I can't bear to get rid of, reminded me of a rather interesting recording I'd made a day or two before I was struck down with the lurgy. I had been hard at work putting a new and unfamiliar machine through its paces when it suddenly began making these strange, droning, rhythmic scraping noises during playback, possibly caused by worn-down parts or some kind of intermittent fault with the motor. Unfortunately, I'm not much of an engineer. Either way, I happened to have my digital recorder with me, because a good sound artist is never off duty. Several minutes later, and one happy accident was in the bag. Listening back to the recording on my laptop, we can clearly make out a rather nice underlying drone, accompanied by the rhythmic shift of the spools slowly revolving. Curiously, it's not the continuous steady rhythm that I might have expected. It gradually shifts over time. So I decided to cut a few extracts from different parts of the recording, turn them into loops, and run them simultaneously to create a shifting pattern of overlapping rhythms. Once this was done, and inspired by Ian Chambers' treatment of the Tower Bridge recordings, I thought it might be an idea to add some instrumentation. Moving to the living room, and observing all viral distancing protocols just in case you were wondering, here's Vanessa laying down her part while listening to this new track on headphones. It was decided that having her respond and improvise along with the sounds quickly and in real time might allow for a few more happy accidents to make themselves felt. Plus she was due at the opera later that evening, so time was of the essence. Indeed, a mere 20 minutes later, and with just a little reverb added to make up for our living room's slightly dreary acoustics, we were all set. And here's what we came up with. So, there we have it. Oboe and tape machine noise together at last, and sounding pretty great as far as I'm concerned. Why not try something similar yourself? Even if you don't happen to have a professional oboist to hand, and I'm strongly of the opinion that every home should have one, encouraging musicians to respond to unusual sounds or intriguing field recordings can be a huge amount of fun and add a fresh dimension to your creative practice. Though, of course, the other lesson we've learnt today is that sometimes the greatest recordings are the ones that need practically nothing doing to them. Should you require further inspiration, links to the CONIT project can be found at urdale.org, and the Whitechapel Accidental Ambience tape can be heard online at londonsoundheritage.wordpress.com. Ian Rawes of the London Sound Survey very sadly passed away last year, but his albums Thames and From Dusk Till Dawn are both available from persistenceofsound.co.uk, while his vast archive of field recordings from in and around London can still be found online at soundsurvey.org.uk. And of course, there's always a wealth of sonic intrigue to be discovered over at musicity.space. Thanks for listening as always. I have been Robin the Fog. My co-conspirator today has been Vanessa Howells, and I shall see you soon for another audio adventure. One which this time will definitely be taking place somewhere outside. Hopefully.